Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. This is another presentation in the series of Healing the Divine Masculine, my personal journey. Welcome back. This is David. This is a series based on my personal life journey, which I have experienced a lot and learned a lot in 67 years. I want to share what I have learned with younger men, especially so that they may benefit. We all have a story to tell, and we can rewrite our story, and we are all must find our own path. I hope you enjoy this journey with me. Today we're going to talk about shadow archetypes. This is a follow on from last presentation, which was 4 weeks ago, hard to believe, about archetypes and navigating the masculine psyche. So now we're going to take a look at the shadows. So the topics here are, we'll do a little definition. We'll talk a little bit about Carl Jung and his on the shadow. Do a little quick review of the last presentation, the masculine archetypes. I'll list out the shadows, the most important aspect of this work. And then the shadow archetypes. We go into the shadow king, the shadow warrior, the shadow magician, and the shadow lover. And then some thoughts on 3 other shadow archetypes. And then some thoughts on understanding who is talking, mostly in our head. So the last presentation started with some words from Carl Jung and his view of archetypes. It was Jung who revived the topic in the mid 20th century. Jung also wrote a lot about this concept called the shadow. Quote, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. It's a fantastic line. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Jung suggests that true self-acceptance, including the shadow, can be a daunting but ultimately necessary step towards wholeness. That's why we're here today. So Jung said, quote, by not being aware of having a shadow, you declare a part of your personality to be non-existent. Then it enters the kingdom of the non-existent, which swells up and takes on enormous proportions. If you get rid of qualities you don't like by denying them, you become more and more unaware of what you are. You declare yourself more and more non existent, and your devils will grow fatter and fatter. It's a powerful, powerful set of statements there. We do not want to deny a part of us. We are here to experience both parts of us, all parts of us. In Carl Jung's psychology, the shadow refers to the unconscious, repressed aspects of our personality, including both negative and positive qualities we don't consciously acknowledge, but that still influence our behavior. The shadow is an archetype in Jungian psychology, representing the hidden, often unconscious side of the psyche. It's not inherently evil, but rather encompasses aspects of ourselves that we've repressed or denied. So, as a quick review, in late 2019, the same time I was going back down to Costa Rica to do ayahuasca for the 3rd time, I was reading a book titled King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. These are the mature masculine energies. Each of the 4 mature archetypes has 2 shadow archetypes, and they are known as the active shadow and the passive shadow. And these 2 shadows form a bipolar shadow structure integrated together, supporting each other. So the king energy is primal in all men. It comes first in importance and includes the rest of the archetypes in perfect balance. The warrior uses clarity of thinking to direct his aggressiveness, to take action. The magician, he is the knower, the wise one, the sage, the healer. And the lover is the one who gives life to the others through physical and emotional experiences. So how I view these in a relationship basically is the magician knows and informs the king. The king decides and directs the warrior, and the warrior takes action or does not take action based on his evaluation of the situation. And the lover kind of oversees all of this, not oversees, but in, is a part of all this because it's the archetype giving life to the others. Shadows, the most important aspect of this work. One reason why it took so long for me to get this out, and it's been 4 weeks, is that putting this together forced me to dig even deeper into my own psyche and understand my own shadows. I could see and hear them every day as I was putting this together, in my thoughts, in my self talk. Um, it was powerful stuff. And it really, really forced me to, and it still forced me, even this morning, to take a long look at myself and this concept of the shadows. For me, this is the most important presentation of this Healing the Divine Masculine series. So, what are the shadow archetypes? Well, the king, as I said, there's an active and a passive. So, the active is called the tyrant, and the passive is called the weakling. For the warrior, the active is called the sadist, and the passive is called the masochist. In the magician, the active is called the manipulator, and the passive is called the innocent one. And in the lover, the active is called the addict, and the passive shadow is the impotent one. Think of the active shadow as the outward expression and the passive shadow as the inward expression. And I'll give a few examples of these. So, the tyrant, the active shadow of the king. The man possessed by the tyrant is very sensitive to criticism, and though putting on a threatening front, will at the slightest remark feel weak and deflated. He won't show you this, however. What you will see, unless you know what to look for, is rage. But under the rage is a sense of worthlessness, of vulnerability and weakness, for behind the tyrant lies the other pole of the king's bipolar shadow system. So, as I just said in the previous slide, the active shadow is the outward expression. So, what you will see from the tyrant is that outward expression of rage. But behind the tyrant lies the bipolar shadow known as the weakling, the passive shadow. If he can't be identified with the king energy, he feels he is nothing. The hidden presence of this passive pole explains the hunger for mirroring, for adore me, worship me, see how important I am, that we feel from so many of our superiors and friends. This explains their angry outbursts and their attacks on those they see as weak, that is, those upon whom they project their own inner weakling. And they're always worried about what others think of him. So the weakling is projecting himself onto other people, and if they don't give him that validation of him being the king, adore me, worship me, see how important I am, then he's going to explode in the rage of the tyrant. All right, I'll give you an example of something here is the boy, if we go back to the premise of that book is boy psychology and man psychology, the immature masculine and the mature masculine. So in the boy version of the king is called the divine child. And the path to the mature king requires things like mentorships and initiations discussed in other videos, such as Rites of Passage, the series I did on Rites of Passage. If the divine child does not mature into the king, he may go through life expressing the shadows of the king, the tyrant, and the weakling. And he does this by temper tantrums from that unhealed rage and the cowering and running away in the face of challenges. And if you're asking yourself, the answer to a question may be yes, this David is looking back at parts of his own life here. This is, I have experienced this. And a lot of this really comes home when you look at it this way and go through this and do this work. It's, we got to look in the mirror. It's not easy, but we got to do it. So if we compare the two, the Shadow King, the tyrant, and the weakling, the tyrant exploits and abuses others. Again, that's an outward expression. While the weakling hides behind the tyrant, he uses the tyrant for his expression. The tyrant is ruthless, while the weakling feels worthless. The tyrant is merciless. The weakling is prone to angry outbursts when not adorned. The tyrant is without feeling, while the weakling is controlled by what others think of him. And the tyrant hates all beauty, talent, strength, while the weakling lacks calm, centeredness, and security within himself. So these are all basically the opposite traits of the mature king. And they go together. They work together inside of us. The tyrant lacks inner structure, while the weakling, taken to its extreme, can lead to paranoia. This is, being so concerned about what others think of us and being so insecure inside of ourselves, and this worthlessness feeling can lead to a lot of paranoia where we don't even want to deal with life and people because of fear. So now we move on to the active shadow of the warrior called the sadist. The warrior as avenging spirit due to intense fear and anger. He can reach to the level of bloodlust in combat. Okay, so much fear and anger. And in the book, they tell of stories of warriors in battle, even going back to Vietnam, um, which these authors grew up during. So did I. Um, Stories of bloodlust in combat due to the avenging spirit that comes out in these certain situations. The sadist has a passion for destruction and cruelty and enjoys the suffering of others. There's a hatred for anything he deems weak. This is a projection of his own inner demons. He needs to feel dominant in a situation, such as the unjust boss at work who mistreats his subordinates. A lot of that in corporate America. And he's prone to violent emotionalism, a father who beats his children and a husband who beats his wife. And there was a lot of that in my father's side of the family. And this is rooted in childhood trauma, as is all of these shadow expressions. So now the passive shadow of the warrior is the masochist who projects his vision of the warrior onto others and lives in fear of them. He cannot voice his opinions. He cannot defend his beliefs. He cannot set healthy boundaries. He's a workaholic who is driven by anxiety and insecurity due to feelings of unworthiness. This one really came home to me because that's a part of who I am. All of these are a way of punishing oneself. So again, that's the inward expression, the passive shadow. This man lacks self-worth. Okay, so as an example, the sadist and the masochist are the two I've been really diving into personally over the last 4 weeks as I put this together. I've always prided myself on being able to outwork others. And I've learned in the last 5 years about my own inner lack of self-worth. I still see these two shadows being very strong, especially as I was going through this, putting this together. So if we put these two side by side, we get the active shadow. The sadist is rooted in fear and anger, while the masochist is rooted in lack of self-worth. The sadist enjoys the suffering of others, while the masochist lives in his own suffering. The sadist is the dominant one, requires a position of dominance, or at least a feeling of dominance over others, while the masochist is the submissive one. The sadist is prone to violent emotionalism, while the lives in silent destruction. And two examples of this that they gave, the sadist was the drill sergeant whose job is to break a man down. And the masochist on the other side of that is the private, the enlisted man who allows his individuality to be destroyed. And that's how these two work in society. The military is a very good example of this. Moving on now to the active shadow of the magician, we have the manipulator. The manipulator is everywhere in our modern society. Examples of this are lawyers, doctors, academia, and Madison Avenue. The mantra of the manipulator is, I am the keeper of great wisdom and secret knowledge. Try to get it from me. Boy, did we see a lot of this over the last 5 years? Trust the science, the keepers of great wisdom and secret knowledge. If you walk into a courtroom, right, generally most of us really can't say much because the lawyers have all the secret knowledge. They've created this system where they are the only ones who can participate because they are the keepers of this quote unquote great wisdom and secret knowledge. The manipulator does not guide others. He directs, misdirects, or disempowers them. He withholds information and charges heavily for the little that he does give. By not sharing what he knows, he cannot share in the joy of others. This is where the aspect of the sadists come in. They enjoy the suffering of others, not the joy of others. And a lot of these lawyers, doctors, and academia, I used to call these modern day feudal guilds because they have set up a system where they have a very high barrier to entry, which it affects the supply and demand, basic fundamentals of economics. And so by keeping the supply low with a high barrier to entry, they keep the price of the demand up. So they withhold information and charge heavily for that by setting up this type of a system. So now the passive shadow of the magician is the innocent one. He wants the power and status of the magician without the responsibilities of sharing, teaching, and guiding. He does not want to be a steward of sacred space. He learns just enough to block others who are making the effort or efforts, and his motivation comes from envy of those who act. His mantras are, that was not my intention, or another great one is, I can say anything or do anything because my intention is pure. This is one I have experienced a lot in corporate America. People who learn just enough to block me from taking action. It's happened recently, within the last year, numerous times. Because they are afraid to act, so they have envy for me because I want to act. So if we put the two together now, the manipulator and the innocent one, the manipulator misdirects and disempowers, while the innocent one blocks others from achieving. The manipulator uses knowledge to serve the self, himself or herself. The innocent one does not want to make the effort to become skilled and knowledgeable. The manipulator keeps knowledge hidden for a large fee, while the innocent one keeps knowledge hidden to maintain his status. So they've got different motivations going on. Same concept. Okay, so now we come to the active shadow of the lover, which is called the addict. And his mantra is, why should I put any limits on my sensual and sexual experience of this vast world? A world that holds unending pleasures for me. He becomes lost in an ocean of sensual pleasure at the slightest tug from the outer world. So that'd be like somebody saying, "Hey, David, let's go have a drink after work." And maybe I had other plans. Maybe I was going to go to the gym. But at that slightest pull of some more sensual pleasure, we go, "Yeah, let's go." And the addict takes over. Eternally restless, always seeking something, but does not know what it is, and seeks it in the pleasures of the senses. So true. He lives very fragmented within, always off center, by lacking mature masculine structure and discipline. Always off center, not grounded, being able to be and allowing himself to be pulled in one direction or another very easily. That ocean of sensual pleasure. He ends by looking for his spirituality in a line of cocaine. This sentence was in the book, and I just about fell out of my chair when I read this because it's so true. He ends by looking for his spirituality in a line of cocaine. Been there, done that. And a lot of people, whether it's cocaine, a line of cocaine, or alcohol, or sex, or food, we are looking for our spirituality in all the wrong places through our senses as opposed to from within. So now we come to the passive shadow of the lover, known as the impotent one. And his mantra is, I don't know. I just feel there's a kind of fog. Everything is just hazy. He lacks enthusiasm for life. This occurs often in elderly through a combination of physical issues, isolation, and lack of purpose. And I saw this with my grandfather. After my grandmother died, which was the end of October 1982, my grandfather, who had basically lost most of his sight through macular degeneration of his eyes, was put into one of the early quote unquote old folks' homes called American House. And he passed away 3 months later. He basically just willed himself to death. He was isolated. He had no purpose. His physical issues were with his eyes, which had been degenerating for about 10 years. And now his wife was gone. And so he just lost the enthusiasm for life and went through what I would call a conscious death within about a 90-day period. He stops taking good care of himself and his surroundings, the impotent one. And this can lead to chronic depression taken to the extreme. So, as an example of this from my own life, is around 2018, 2019, I was not taking good care of myself. I was drinking nightly. I wasn't doing things like brushing my teeth regularly. I wasn't doing laundry often enough. And what I was doing was I was expressing this bipolar shadow structure of the addict and the impotent one, integrated together, supporting each other nights and weekends. Okay. Meanwhile, at the same time, I was working 7 days a week, expressing the sadist and the masochist bipolar structure during the day. So I would get up at 5 or 6 in the morning, take a shower to wake myself up, and I was in Michigan, so I was taking cold showers. I was into the Wim Hof thing at the time, and I was taking these ice cold showers. I would stand there for anywhere from 4 to 5 minutes to really just wake myself up. This freezing cold shower, and I'd go to work for 10 or 12 hours a day, and then I would come home and I would flip flop from the sadist masochist bipolar structure to the addict impotent one bipolar structure. And I've done this a few times in my life. I notice when I go back to the 1980s, I was doing the same thing. I didn't miss work. And there was some projects where I was working 7 days a week. I had a couple of them in the 80s. But at nighttime, it was the attic taking over. And so I was flip-flopping between these two bipolar structures. And I have to be very careful about that right now. Right now, I'm expressing some of this sadist masochist bipolar structure during the day. But fortunately, I've gotten away from the addict and the impotent one, and I'm just loving life. But that's how these things can really work together. Um, all these different archetypes, whether they're the mature, um, healed ones or they're the shadow ones, they're always trying to express themselves. Okay. So if we compare the two, the addict and the impotent one, the addict lives for sensual pleasures while the impotent one has no enthusiasm for life. The addict is always searching for the next high, guilty, as charged, Your Honor. The impotent one has trouble getting out of bed and taking care of himself. Right? The addict lives off center while the impotent one lives in depression. The addict would confuse sex with love. Again, guilty as charged. The impotent one has no love life and probably has problems with erectile dysfunction. So, moving on, I wanted to do some thoughts on three other shadow archetypes. One of them, the trickster, is actually talked about in the book. And they said, quote, though its purpose in its positive mode seems to be to expose lies, if it is left unchecked, it moves into its negative side and becomes destructive of oneself and others. This is Elon Musk. And right now he is in this positive mode, seemingly exposing lies. But there's another side of him that talks about putting chips in your brain, or merging us with technology and AI and turning us basically into cyborgs. And that is the path to how the human can get to Mars, because the human in its current form cannot survive that trip. Okay, I just put that out there. We cannot survive that trip. All right, so if he moves into his negative side, this is what he's going to be pushing. Now, there's a young gentleman from Argentina named Matias De Stefano, who I have followed quite often in the last 5 years. He, in an interview recently, said that was talking about Elon Musk, and he said Elon has to move into his heart space. Right now, he is in his head space, as most of our society is, and he needs to move into his heart space. If he does not move into his heart space, he will move into this negative side and become destructive to oneself and others, into our society, based on the position that our society is giving him right now, through the sales pitch of the media. Right now, it seems to be in a positive mode, but it's cannot go unchecked. So the next one is called the victim, which I believe is a form of the weakling. The victim archetype, a prevalent concept in psychology and storytelling, describes individuals who view themselves as perpetually wronged or powerless, often blaming external factors for their circumstances rather than taking responsibility. This archetype can manifest in various ways, including feeling helpless, passive, and blaming others or themselves for life's challenges. We live in another view, if we continue to flip the view of how we view the world, another view is we live in a victim culture, a victim victimizer. We have people in power. Some of them are we don't see, some of them we do, who are the victimizers. They set up a system through different ways, like the media, for example, to sell the masses on the idea that they are victims, that they are weak, they suffer from genetic determinism, they suffer from, somebody who should know better mentioned this the other day on social media, that that there is such a thing as cancer-causing genes. That's bullshit. That the creator of this divine human form would never give you a cancer-causing gene. That is a form of victim thinking. Because we know, though many of us know, that we are, as this divine human form, are powerful beyond belief. We have no idea how powerful we are. So what we do is we were projecting this weakness onto the creator, saying the creator is setting us up with cancer-causing genes, and I got to call BS on that. But we do live in a victim culture, I believe, and it's been that way for a while. The last one is the judge, that inner critic or voice within that constantly evaluates, critiques, and judges oneself and others. It's a demanding voice that strives for perfection, conformity, and adherence to rules, often leading to feelings of self doubt and anxiety. I do believe this is could also be a form of the sadist masochist, um, where we project this perfection, this need for perfection from our own inner insecurities and our own inner demons. But I know I hear the judge a lot, I hear the victim. These are very powerful archetypes. So, this is going to lead into what I think is going to be the next video in this series, and that is who is talking and the integration of these archetypes. I've said for a while now that I know when my victim is talking, my shadow king, all right? And I'm very familiar with the addict, the shadow lover. As I stated earlier, about 6 to 7 years ago, I was experiencing the impotent one along with the addict, so the forms of the shadow lover. And as I put this together, I became more cognizant of some of the other shadows talking, in particular the sadist and the masochist. I see this a lot in my professional life. Our professional life in this society is where we look for a lot of validation, and we can get caught. I see it in all the guys I work with. That we've all trained by the dysfunctional educational system to be the answer man, and we look for validation by knowing more than the other guy. And I see this in myself, and in this left brain analytical computer world that we live in. And since I work in information technology, I see this every day. So this has been something that I have been trying to observe literally on a daily basis over the last 4 weeks as I put this together. The sadist and the masochist, the workaholic, the judge, all of them, my shadow warrior. And I have also experienced the effects of the manipulator, the shadow magician being disempowered by others. I actually could put a list together of when I was at this bank in 2016. I went through 3 years there, and I was disempowered by three different people over the course of those 3 years. And it was very difficult to take. And I didn't understand this topic at the time. This was right before I found this book. Um, I left that situation in June of 2019, and that's when I started going down to Costa Rica to do ayahuasca. But looking back on it now, as I was being affected or disempowered by the manipulator in each of these three people. And it happens somewhat now too in the job I have now. I have people that want to rein me in. They don't want me taking action. Um, it's happened quite a few times just in the last year. So we want to know who's talking, which means we have to become cognizant and observe our own self. That's going to be the next video. Okay. So to summarize all this, as previously stated, I think this is the most important presentation in this series. At least it has been for me. Um, the information that I shared really resonates with many of my personal experiences, and I shared a few of those. And I hope that something resonated with you and that you were able to get some insight into your own life experiences. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I know it was a lot in a short time. We're 35 minutes into this. I think this is probably about the longest one. I wanted to share this important segment of the journey with you. And as I stated, the next one I think will be within the next few weeks is integrating our shadow archetypes. Meanwhile, enjoy each day. It's beautiful life. Or as the old movie, Jimmy Stewart movie, It's a Wonderful Life. Goodbye for now.